Anyway, how's everybody doing? Okay?
Good. Oh,
Yeah.
good. Here's Dan. Gretchen's here. It's 6:45.
Showtime.
It's showtime.
Live from New
Yes.
York.
Live from New York. All right. We got enough people. Hi, Dan. All right, let's bring this meeting to order. This is the May 2nd, 2023 Newburyport Conservation Commission meeting taking place on the Zoom platform. And this meeting is being recorded. First item on the agenda are the approval of the April 18th meeting minutes. Anybody got any changes?
Worked for me.
Okay,
Gretchen, you did an amazing job, Gretchen. Thank you, as usual.
Thank you.
Motion we accept.
do I have a second? Anybody? I'll second. Roll calls. David Vine,
Yes.
Carol Wagon,
I'll abstain since I wasn't there.
all right, Dan Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Mullen.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Well, then maybe
Yeah, no.
we need to table this. Well, actually, we can all vote on it anyway. I'm going to say yes, and we will move on with this. All right, next item is Plum Island updates.
Okay, I sent you all, as Joe reminded me, a email several days ago with some aerial photos and graphics about the planting and the nourishment Reservation Terrace on the dunes. That was just some sort of an FYI. UNH has already been out there and planted, I think, over an acre worth of dune grass on the newly nourished dune. And they continue to plant more further north and also down closer to the jetty. So, and that's just this spring. I think they will also be out there in the fall and maybe even next year doing more plantings. So that's really wonderful. And our next steps are some fencing, designation of some pathways and some signage. So we're going to work with DCR, the city, and UNH on those elements as well.
Do we have isn't there an upcoming
RBA.
Beach Alliance meeting?
The next MRBA meeting is, I do think there's one scheduled, you're right, and I think it is on, good question, actually. Possibly on the, no, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there isn't one scheduled yet, so I'll look into that, but when I get the email regarding the next meeting, I'll just forward it to you.
Okay. All right, then. We have no certificates of compliance or requests for determinations, so can I get a motion to open up public hearings?
So moved.
Second.
All right, roll call. David Vine,
Yes.
Carol Wagon,
Yes.
Dan Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Mullen,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right. First and only item, Kim Turner, City of Newburyport, 149 High Street, notice of intent.
Okay, so let me see. This is their notice of intent. I hope you all had a chance to take a look at it. It's really complex, sort of like big project that we're looking at. And so therefore, I'm going to allow the applicant to share their screen so that they can run through their presentation. And I'm sure they will do a much better job than I could ever try to do. So I've promoted Kim Turner, Krista Wolf from GEI, Mike Sabolis from GEI, and let me see if there's anyone else over there. Mike Igo, Aqueous. Is there anyone else
Should be Ashley Hammond if she's on.
I don't see Ashley Hammond. I see Anita Greenwood, Kay Horgan.
Ashley
Um,
might be in the same office as Mike.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So everyone else should be, you can let me know if, well, I'll keep looking at the attendees list to see if anybody comes in. We need, but from now for moving forward, just as a sort of general background for the commission, this is the project that the city is proposing to undertake to restore the water quality in the Frog Pond at Bartlett Mall, as well as do some upgrades to the playground that's adjacent to that area. And Kim, maybe you can take it from here.
Sure. I'm going to think if Krista can share her screen. Be great.
Oh, that
Not quite.
this happened last time too. Try
Oh,
one more
there it
time.
is. We got it. We got it.
Okay. All set.
All right. So thank you everyone for your time tonight and listening to this proposal and considering this application. My name is Kim Turner. I'm the manager of special projects for the city. And many of you might remember me as being the former chair of the Parks Commission. And some of you might have even watched me present about this project a few times in the past. This project's been a long time coming. And on a personal note, when I first joined the commission over 8 years ago, I did so in order to help protect vulnerable open spaces such as this. And so I'm beyond thrilled tonight to introduce you to a world-class engineering team who has been working diligently and creatively for the last 18 months on this project. Next slide, please. So speaking of the team tonight, we have with us Mike Sibilis and Krista Wolf from GEI, also Mike Igo and maybe Ashley Hammond from Aqueous, and you'll be hearing from them in just a little bit. But first, I'm going to want to give a very brief history of the site and introduction to the project. Then GEI and Aqueous will review the current conditions and provide a project summary. We'll review how each of the performance standards will be met, describe the variance request. We'll then review the investigation that occurred last summer and fall, and review the alternatives that the team had come up with that were considered, describe the concept, the project sequence, and details. And finally, we'll leave some time for questions and comments. Next slide, please. So just a very brief history of the Bartlett Mall. Newburyport's extremely rich in history, as we all know. And although there are many, many examples of historic sites in our city, few look as identical as they did back in the 1600s. Bartlett Mall is Newburyport's original town common. It once housed a rope walk. It was a site for grazing and watering livestock, and it was a training ground for the Revolutionary War militia. In the 1800s, it was transformed into a park for aesthetic purposes only. And then in 1805, the construction of the federal courthouse began, and the water inlet, which was the only source of fresh water into and out of the pond, was cut off. The pond became stagnant at that time. In 1891, a fountain was installed as an attempt to try to clean and aerate the water because of the stench of the smell of the water. That deteriorated over the years. And then in 1987, a renewed interest in the pond began with a local artist here, Jeffrey Briggs, in town, who worked to restore the fountain with the swan statue we see at the top today. But that quickly deteriorated due to the lack of clean water in the pond. So complaints of odors and water quality really date back in this pond back to the 1800s. Next slide, please. In the early 1900s, after the courthouse was constructed, renowned landscape architect Charles Elliott was hired by the city of Newburyport to design the park. He had a sort of overall vision for the park, which included a protective granite edge, meticulously sloped lawn, circulation of the water via the fountain, water and high branch trees that would frame the beauty of the space with no flowering plants of any type. And he also had a vision to complete the northwest corner of the slope. Some of his vision was realized, but many pieces, including the granite edge and the northwest corner grading, were never fully realized due to the cost. And also the water quality continued to remain a problem, both due to cost and really the lack of technology to remedy the problem of the water quality long-term. Next slide, please. So we're at a really critical moment in this project right now. This is a complex project. It has many pieces that must be carefully orchestrated. This water quality problem demands a unique solution, and we think we have the right team to do that today. We also, for the first time, have funding in place to finally complete this project using bonding against future allocations of the CPA to the tune of almost $3 million. We have political and public support that are building, and we have a lot of momentum to get this project done. The water quality here is at a critically dangerous ecological point. We've experienced increased harmful algal blooms over the years. We know the pond is stagnant and toxic, and it's certainly not the kind of place that we want to be at the heart of our city. Next slide, please. And before I pass this off to GEI, I just wanted to put this slide up. I had mentioned earlier that this has been a priority project for the Parks Commission for better part of a decade. This is the conceptual idea that the commission has for the overall vision of the park. This is not being proposed tonight, but this sort of gives you an idea of what their vision is for maybe down the line. And so I'll just leave this slide up for a moment if you want to take a quick look, especially at sort of the elliptical boardwalk behind the courthouse. That's not being proposed tonight, but this is something that the Parks Commission has been mulling over. And from that, I'm going to turn this over to GEI and Aqueous if you want to change slides, and I'm going to hand it off to Mike Sibilis, I believe.
Actually, I'm going to snag it.
Oh, sorry,
Kim.
Krista.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So as Kim mentioned, I'm Krista Wolf. I'm from GEI Consultants, and over the next handful of slides, I'm going to reiterate the current conditions that Kim described at the pond. I'm going to give a really high-level overview of the proposed restoration that will go into more detail later on, but just a quick high overview from my part. And then discuss how the proposed project is going to be in line with the WPA performance standards. So just to reiterate, the Mall was modified into a park around 1800, and it's basically been treated as a man-made feature since that time. The pond is currently highly eutrophic, and it has been for approximately 200 years. I'll be discussing further later, but there does not appear to be any connection of the pond water itself to the underlying regional groundwater table. There are nutrient loads present in sediment to depths of 12 feet below the bottom of the pond. There are also urban type contaminants present in the shallow sediment at the bottom of the pond. And as noted by signs around the perimeter, the water is not currently safe for human contact. So just a high level overview of what the proposed restoration effort entails. There are proposed efforts at the park and proposed efforts at the pond. I'll start with the park. We are including upgrades to the playground area that include ADA compliant equipment. We're proposing upgrades to the park access walkways and paths around the pond. And we're also proposing granite seat height blocks, as Kim mentioned, around the pond perimeter, but above the top of bank. The pond restoration includes dewatering, treatment, and discharging the existing pond water under the NIPD's dewatering and remediation general permit into the storm system. Our proposal includes installation of a liner system, which is made up of a methane system, some geogrid to help the strength of the sediment, an HDPE, high density polyethylene liner, as well as a layer of armor stone and a layer of benthic sediment along the pond bottom, and additionally a vegetated perimeter around the bank of the pond. It also includes a water quality system, including a bedrock water supply to maintain the water level in the pond, as well as components of filtration, aeration, and recirculation of the water. And lastly, as Kim mentioned, we're also looking at removing, rehabilitating, and reinstalling the fountain. So just a quick look at how our proposed restoration efforts are going to comply with the Wetland Protection Act performance standards. These proposed restoration activities do impact the resource areas, but they meet the performance standards. First off, we're proposing to establish best management practices to help minimize any impacts to resource areas to the extent we can. For the bank resource area, we're planning on restoring the grading and slope conditions to generally match what is existing out there right now. The proposed project would increase the linear feet of bank. And we're also proposing to install that vegetated ring along the bank of the pond, as well as clean benthic sediment along the bottom of the pond to help improve the ecological health. The second resource, WPA resource area being impacted is land under water bodies and waterways. Similar to bank, we're proposing to restore the grading and slope conditions to generally match what's out there now. And our project also includes an increase of land under water bodies and waterways by about 10,000 square feet. Our proposed effort would provide long-term improvement to water quality and ecological health of the pond by restoring the condition to biomimic a natural pond setting. And I did just want to take 1 second to mention that there are several performance standards in the WPA under bank and land under water bodies and waterways that aren't applicable to this project because they are for streams and boat channels. They are for habitats that are protected. They relate to groundwater impacts, which are not applicable at this site. And they're related to constructing structures on the bank, which we're not proposing. I also just want to take a second to reiterate that we included a variance request to the Newburyport Code of Ordinances in the Notice of Intent. As you're aware, this proposed project would include alteration in the bank and land under water bodies and waterways. It would also include alteration in the Newburyport 25-foot no disturbance zone, as well as the 100-foot buffer zone. But it is our opinion that the proposed restoration effort is in the overriding public interest. It will provide a better recreational space for the public. It will mitigate eutrophic conditions in the pond that are not safe for human contact. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, it will increase the linear feet of bank and the square footage of the land under water bodies. My colleague Mike Stibulis will discuss the alternatives evaluation further, but it is our opinion that there were not other reasonable alternatives that exist that would have as much success without altering the resource areas. And as I mentioned, mitigating measures will be employed to protect the resource areas to the extent possible. So that was all included in the variance request in the NOI. Just a quick plan view of the currently existing jurisdictional areas, both the Wetland Protection Act and the Newburyport Ordinance jurisdictional areas. Let me see if you guys can see my mouse. No, I don't think so. The gray towards the center of the pond is the approximate area of the land under water bodies and waterways. The white that's around that is the approximate area of the bank. And then the hatched area is the approximate 25-foot no disturbance zone. And the exterior gray is the approximate 100-foot buffer zone. And just a quick overview of the investigation that GEI performed back at the end of 2021. We started by reviewing the investigations and data that were collected by other consultants prior to us. We identified some data gaps, and some of you may have seen us out at the Mall at the end of 2021 doing our investigation. And we looked at components of the pond itself, as well as the surrounding area of the pond. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but the key findings were One, we saw urban contaminants such as metals, petroleum-related contaminants, some semi-volatile organic compounds in that shallow sediment right at the bottom of the pond. We also realized that those analytical results meant that the shallow sediment is not suitable for disposal at a Massachusetts lined landfill. We did see that there was phosphorus, which is the nutrient load present in up to 12 feet below the bottom of the pond in the sediment. And as I mentioned, we did not see any hydraulic connection from the pond water to the groundwater. In fact, I'll show you on the next couple slides, the groundwater appears to be about 30 feet below the bottom of the pond. So really, this pond is just surface water contained by low permeability sediment. It's a 4-foot pond, just contained by that sediment in place, not being fed by another water source. So here's a quick plan view of both our investigation locations as well as the previous consultants. Yellow spots are GEI investigation locations from the end of 2021, and the white locations are by Horsley Witten in 2014. And I just want to point out the 2 lines that are on that plan view. On the left is section A and on the right is section B, because this following slide shows these 2 sections, the top A, the bottom B. As you can see, there's monitoring wells on the left and right sides of both of those sections. And that's where we're able to measure the depth to groundwater right at the outer perimeter of the pond. The pond water is indicated by the gray area, and the groundwater table is the dotted line that's approximately 30 feet below the bottom of the pond. So we really did not observe any connection to the regional groundwater table. From here, I am going to pass it to my colleague, Mike Sabulis, who's going to talk about the alternative and feasibility analyses and then get into some more details of the proposed restoration.
Thanks, Krista, and good evening, Commissioners. It's nice to talk to you this evening. So leading off into this, probably the question on everyone's mind we're going to answer today is how did we end up at this recommended alternative? So this started back after our investigations were concluded with trying to figure out various methods that would suit the city's goals of correcting the eutrophied condition that is present at the Bartlett Mouth Frog Pond. So we looked at this from a whole bunch of different angles and tried to set back our place to look at everything that could be on the table for means and methods to correct the situation. So the various alternatives that we looked into were to address the eutrophic condition of the pond, and then also to ultimately provide a long-term water quality solution. On the right of our screen here, you can see the alternatives evaluated, which looked at various kinds of dredging, in situ solidification, lining of the pond, and everything including alum treatments or other sort of chemical treatments of the pond to mitigate the nutrient condition. So as we worked our way through our evaluation, we had to consider a bunch of items: the effectiveness, the costs, the feasibility, and a couple of those all together with the city's desired ultimate appearance and use of the pond in the future. Through that path, we landed on the recommended alternative of pond dewatering, liner installation, and ongoing water quality treatment. And the water quality treatment piece really followed on from a feasibility evaluation performed by our colleagues at Aqueous that really was driven by the use of a lining system and then designing a water treatment system that would work in combination with this new system, this biomimic pond that we're trying to create. Next slide, please, Krista. So this is our conceptual project sequence. It was included in the NOI package. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it's important to note how the sequence we kind of envision going and might change as the contractor is selected and see how they most efficiently might engage this. But it plays into the following slides, which talk about our project setup, working through the actual liner installation, and then wrapping up with the water treatment system. Next slide, please, Kristen. So at startup, we envision a bunch of things happening at once with the mobilization and the staging and the erosion control at the outset. So the black dashed line you see on the perimeter there, that's our estimated extensive erosion control to prevent outside migration of various things into the pond of the area that we're going to be working in. And then our staging areas, to the extent that we can keep them out of the buffer zone, we certainly will. They're marked on the plan. And I note that any fueling or refueling in these areas will be well outside the buffer zone, and as right it should be. We also note, as you can see on this plan, 2 construction entrances, one off of High Street and one off of Auburn Street. Once those staging and erosion controls are all set up to everyone's agreement, we'll begin dewatering of the pond. I think we're looking at somewhere around a little over 2 million gallons of water, which will dewater out of the pond over the course of about a week. That will be done, as Krista mentioned, in accordance with the NIPD's dewatering remediation general permit that was just released, which will allow us to treat that water and discharge it to surface water through storm drain systems in the city, which will ultimately discharge to the Merrimack. So we will have influent and effluent testing of that water to make sure we're in compliance and meet surface water quality standards, for the Merrimack River. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of where we will end up. I know we'll probably see this image at least one more time in this presentation, but what this is intended to show is what things will look like at the end. And for my part in this conversation, before we hand it off to our colleagues at Aqueous, what I'd like to point out is the extent of the liner system, which is kind of the black line on the inside of the pond. As Krista mentioned, that's going to consist of various things. And that we'll get into in the next slide as we look at in cross section, but that is the extent of where we see the land underwater and bank being at the proposed project finish. Outside of that is a proposed granite seat height wall, which will sit above and outside of the bank. And that's one of those things that is intended to be in line with Charles Elliott's vision of the pond. Next slide, please, Krista. So diving to some of the details of the proposed liner, what you'll see here is, not in great detail, but in our cross section, you can see where the estimated bottom of the bank is currently and our estimated top of the bank, and that our land underwater actually stretches from the bottom of the bank to the midpoint, and the top of bank will be a bit outside by a few feet, I believe at least 3 feet above the current water table, which will be set at about an elevation 48, which will work to maintain a 4-foot water depth throughout the pond for water help, which will help with our water quality maintenance. If you look in the typical detail in the lower left-hand part of the screen, the liners will typically consist of a methane venting system overlain by a geogrid, then an HDP or LDP or equivalent sort of liner system, then some armor stone to make sure we protect that liner system, and then a benthic sediment. The methane venting system is really there just in case the degradation of the organics underneath the liner actually may off gas, and we want to make sure we don't create any bubbles in our liner. The geogrid will then, as Krista mentioned, act as a support system for the liner above it. And then the HDP is really going to act as our cutoff for any sort of nutrient loading or anything moving back into our new clean water system. The stone again acts as an armor, so no one can accidentally get through it with a shovel or a piece of equipment. And then our benthic sediment layer will be designed to kind of accommodate regrowth, new habitat for various creatures that are going to re-inhabit the pond. What you'll also see in here is a typical detail for our water quality lines. That's our typical diagram to the right of the page. That is going to be strictly through stone, and that is to facilitate aeration and water circulation without encumbering the water lines. This will be slotted pipe, and again, Mike and Ashley will get into that in a minute. But those areas will be strictly stone to the surface, although limited in nature. But again, important to maintain that circulation and aeration through the pond for the long-term maintenance. Next slide, please. Here is a conceptual liner, our conceptual liner at the bank detail, which is important, which shows our vegetated buffer at the edge. This is something we discussed with Mass DEP a bit ago, and they thought that would be a nice add to the project to kind of provide an ecological habitat that isn't currently there, because right now the banks, as I'm sure the commission is aware, does not provide any real ecological habitat. So providing this vegetation recreates that and also allows for an extension and growth of our available linear feet of bank, and then, as I mentioned earlier, our increase in land underwater. We are planning on a continuous crushed stone base outside of the top of the bank beyond it, and that's where our granite seat height wall will sit. I think that's it for this slide. Kristen, next slide, please. And at this time, I'm going to pass it over to our colleagues at Aqueous, Mike and Ashley, and they're going to talk a little bit more about the water treatment, water quality system that is going to be in place once we refill the pond in the line after the liner is installed.
Right.
Thank you. For your
Thanks,
time.
Mike. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Mike Igo, Aqueous Consultants, Andover, Massachusetts. Ashley Hammond is my colleague. She's off camera, but she's here as well. We're both professional engineers that specialize in water systems all around the country. So for this project, we've been working with GEI for a number of years. And we actually had a similar project that we were working on together, which ended up with us working on this project. So as Mike and Krista mentioned, that and Kim as well, that there's a rich history here of this being more of a water feature and more of a man-made system rather than a natural pond. So when all of the sediment and the subsurface or sub pond surface issues are dealt with the liner, then the next step is basically to start over and create a pond that is safe for incidental contact. So what our directive was when we started out with this project is to have the ability to, in general, be able to canoe, be able to kayak, not necessarily swim in the pond. That's not necessarily what the goal is, but in the event that there was incidental contact, that it wouldn't pose a problem, and that we would also have the ability to clear the pond and make sure that it didn't have harmful algal blooms and that it had a fairly clear water quality, so that it would look good as well going forward. So that was the charge that we're presented with, and so we'll just discuss briefly what our system will be as far as treating the water and recirculating it to maintain a higher water quality after the system or after the pond is relined. So again, as Krista mentioned, that the pond is generally about 4 feet deep. That's generally what, once everything is lined and everything is capped from the stone perspective, everything's put back together, that generally speaking, we'd be looking at it anywhere from a variation of a 3.5 foot to 4 foot depth across the pond. We are planning to keep the fountain. There is an additional scope of work that's part of this work that we discussed in the NOI that would be refurbishing the fountain. That's part of the construction documents that we're working on right now, but the intent is to replumb that fountain with a clean water supply that will generate, so that that fountain can continue to provide surface aeration and horizontal circulation throughout the system. But the key thing is, as Krista and Mike had mentioned in their presentation, is that there is no natural inlet or outlet. It was sealed away during construction of the courthouse, and then it's discovered through the process of the ground exploration that GEI provided, that there is no inlet or outlet. So in essence, what this is a stagnant puddle of water for the most part. There's no inlet, there's no outlet, there's no means of circulation. The fountain has been disabled for a while. So most of the water that's in there, the rises and falls of water level that you see, those are generally based on the evidence and based on what we've found, is that it's really just from a rainfall that falls on the pond and around the pond and flows to the pond itself, and then evaporation. So those are the fluctuations in the pond that you do see. So once everything is lined, we'll go over. Basically, what we have here is it's a flow diagram. It's not to scale. So what this diagram is intended to show is the movement of water and the biomimicry, if you will, of filtering and aerating and getting to the point where we can get a clean water supply. In our report that we provided as part of the NOI appendix or the appendices, we discussed that there were 6 critical components to a healthy pond. It was oxygen, there was a sufficient amount of water, lower temperatures, good circulation, a nutrient balance, and biodiversity. So the pond in its existing condition lacks a lot of those components. So the goal going forward here is that once everything is lined back up and that the pond is refilled, that we have the ability to provide more oxygen, more water, more temperature control to limit and inhibit and prevent harmful algal bloom growth and promote circulation. So first and foremost, we need a water supply. So I will attempt to use the annotation button here, but I will use this in in Zoom here. So first step is that we need a water supply. So what we propose is a bedrock well. The bedrock well is a deep well. It goes deep within the bedrock aquifers. Right now, where that's proposed is on the east side of the project, or the east side of the pond. That was not selected haphazardly. We had hired and subbed out a hydrogeologist to identify, using a fracture trace analysis, where the most amount of bedrock fractures would exist, so that when we drill through bedrock, we would have the best opportunity to find water. So we've identified a location on the east side of the pond where we'll intend to drill, and the drilling depth would be anywhere from 600 to 700 feet. It could be as much as 1,000 feet deep. But the intent is to get a water supply that's basically virgin, that's not connected to the pond. It's not connected to the near ground water supply. And it's a water supply that we can rely upon, that has good water quality. So from there, that bedrock well would then flow around the pond to where the desired pump house location would be. And this pump station is, and this pump house here that we're showing here, it's not to scale. It's just intended to show the flow diagram. So it's not 4 times as big as the courthouse. It's just, it's quite small, which is, there's going to be a lot of components within the pump house in this pump station. So from here, we'd run bedrock water, bedrock well water through a filtration system in and of itself, and then pump that water into a deep wet well manhole. What that deep wet well manhole is intended to do is intended to provide a new gravity-fed hydraulic connection between the pond itself and where we can put our pumps in order to recirculate and filter this water. And what that basically looks like, it's a circular manhole. It goes deeper than the pond itself. We know that there's no groundwater, localized groundwater. It's 30 feet deep, so that we feel pretty confident that we can we can excavate out this wet well to accommodate our pump intake, and then all of our pond intake, our pump equipment, and anything that we need in order to provide pumping, aeration, and filtration for this system. This pump station, or this system, would be enclosed in an architectural shed. We've got some ideas for what that looks like, but let's leave it to be at this point that that's still under consideration of what that looks like. But the intent is to be a wood structure set on a concrete slab at this point. So from there, we intend to pump water out of the wet well. And this is done on purpose because a lot of this is intended to be aesthetic. We did not want to provide outlets or exposed discharges of water back to the pond. So we're trying to make everything as discreet as possible, so that, not just to biomimic, but also as a means of protecting the public at large from any type of pump discharges or anything that would be exposed. We want to try to hide everything as best as that we can with the system that we got by putting all this equipment inside of a pump house shed. So from inside this wet well, we'll pump out, and then the intent is to go through a continuous sand filter. The intent of the sand filter is to provide filtration, so that we provide a good amount of filtration, but not crystal clear, perfectly distilled water. That we do want to have some good water. We want to still have some good bacteria. We want to have some good balance of that water, so that when it goes back to the pond, that it can still proliferate a good amount of biodiversity in the pond when the biology then gets reintroduced to the pond, as discussed by Krista and Mike, using the benthic sand layer and using the plant material that will circumscribe the pond itself. So from there, from a sand filter, it will go through a pump system where, if there is a need to add any type of organic or non-caustic chemicals. So part of the charge that we've had as well is to say, we do not want a swimming pool. We're not providing any chlorine. We're not providing any bromine. We're not providing anything of the sort. If we do need to make some type of injections, whether it's some type of organic additive just to help with water clarity or biodiversity, we can do that through an injection port that's simple to use. From there, then we would provide a mechanical oxygenation system. So once we've gone through the filter, then we can add a means of adding air, means of adding oxygen to the discharge of the pump system, so that when it returns back to the pond, then it gets distributed through as Mike and Krista showed, a number of perforated pipe that gets put within the stone liner that then returns back to the pond in perforated pipe that then gets diffused back through the stone layer and then gets returned back to the pond from the bottom up. The intent there is to keep the return pipes hidden, but also mimic a spring-fed pond where you would get vertical circulation and then you would get also horizontal circulation, given the network of pipe that's above the liner up beneath the stone. From this perspective as well, what we want to do with this pond is we want to also eliminate as many of the potential new contaminants, so that once we get this pond lined, the intent then is to prevent any other stormwater or any other potential contaminants, so to speak, that could re-enter this pond. The intent of this pond is that once it's relined, is that it's a closed system. The only water that gets into the system is through the bedrock well or from natural rainfall itself. So if rain falls on the pond directly, that's fine. If it's bedrock well water, that's fine. What we don't want is we don't want to have surface runoff from the nearby slopes, from the grassed areas. We're going to be able to, the intent is to remove and relocate the downspouts that are at the back of the existing courthouse and then redirect them to a separate dry well over here so that we're not introducing any type of runoff contaminants from the roof, whether it's bird droppings, et cetera, that could get back into the pond itself. So the intent is to provide a closed system with the new crushed stone path, block granite edging, and the vegetative buffer itself. We have an additional dry well over here on this side next to the pump station. And the intent for that is it's to capture any of the incidental roof downspouts for this roof system that's here, but also provide a filter backflush. So the intent is, in order to keep the maintenance as low as possible, we're trying to automate any and all the equipment that we possibly can here. So the filter backflush for that sand filter will automatically discharge a backflush cycle to the dry well, where that can be maintained and that can be cleaned out in an annual maintenance program from there. And it also, as the dry well in and of itself, will also serve as an emergency overflow in the event that this pond does get up to and passes the freeboard or the maximum water level, that there is a water supply, there is a means of escape for, in the event that water supply does get too high, it does have a means of escape through infiltration. Okay, can I go to the next slide, please, Krista? Great. So here's some of the infrastructure that we're talking about through the bank and the general concept of the system. So, so what we see here on the top part here is having this intake pipe, which you see here. That's going to go and be fed, and that will be submerged in the pond itself. This pipe will go through the bank and be integrated into the liner so that we don't lose water through this penetration that we're proposing. Then that water supply will go into this deep wet well that we see here, that we showed in plan view or in the diagram before, where we can place our pumps, pump out, and then go into the sand filter that's here. And then that water supply, that's once it's cleaned through the filtration systems, that water then gets discharged back into the stone liner pipe system that GEI showed before. And again, here, what you see in the lower left corner is the intake pipe as it goes through the liner. There'll be overlapping liner splices in order and a seepage collar to be able to prevent water from the pond from leaking out, basically, and to support that intake pipe. You'll notice as well too that with this intake as well, that we are proposing a dock. Part of the program that's was proposed and offered to us as part of the charge is to provide a means of water access, so that if it is, if we do want to, or if the city wants to be able to allow for canoes or kayaks or rowboats to be able to circumnavigate the pond, that they have an access point to do that. What that dock also provides, it actually also provides a protection so that people can't get underneath the dock to be able to impact or influence that intake screen. That intake pipe is not meant for suction, so don't think of it more of as a whirlpool of water sucking through that. All that really is, it's providing a hydraulic connection by gravity to feed into into the wet well that's underneath the pump house off the bank and further away. And here again on the lower right is just a typical dry well detail where water would come in either through the overflow of the pond from an incidental perspective or from a filtered back flushing perspective, so that water would enter the dry well. It would then infiltrate, and there's, as we've discussed, there's 25 feet below that before we actually hit groundwater. So we have plenty of space, or plenty of vertical depth to be able to infiltrate this water effectively. So next slide, please, Krista. Yeah, and just to summarize, and we've seen this slide before, but the intent here also is just to go over some of the line work that's here, is that we do intend to provide utilities from the street, from Auburn Street, to go and provide utilities for the pump house that we have here. The dry well, the first dry well is intended to be proposed here, so that, and then that's connected to the deep wet well that's here underneath the pump house, which is that diamond shape that we're proposing. The dock and the intake pipe are here, and that's our means of access to, on the dock itself, as a means of point of entry for canoes, paddle boards, whatever the proposed water activity that will be proposed or what's planned down the road. The red dash lines that you see here, those are the return pipe network. So once we've pumped water out of the wet well and filtered it, it then returns through this network of perforated pipe where water and any injected air system and oxygenation system that we propose will then be pumped back through the system through perforated pipe, so that it can diffuse and then it can re-enter the pond from below up to get vertical movement of water, vertical and horizontal movement of water through the system. The green line that you see here is going to be a replumbed pipe, a replumbing of the existing fountain, so that the water supply for the fountain to provide surface aeration and circulation, that will come from the pump house. That'll be rerouted to the pump house that's proposed here. And then in general, I think that's all that we have for our discussion. And so I think we'll kick it back over to Kim to summarize and wrap up.
Yeah, so again, thank you for your time. I know this is a lot of information to throw at you. We figured this would be a first good discussion tonight. We'd like to open it up if there are any sort of initial questions or comments while we have our team here. Yeah, so thank you again.
Okay, one question I had was about the fountain. Is the base of that going to be penetrating the liner as well?
The intent is no, they're going to remove that entirely before after dewatering, but before the liner and other work happens, and then set it back on top.
It's just going to be set there on top?
Yeah, if there needs to be some foundation work that needs to happen, I guess we can consider that during the time, but as of right now, yeah, we're planning on setting on top of the liner.
Okay.
I'm wondering when you were planning to start this, and just kind of strange question, but why the playground first when the focus is supposed to be on the pond?
I'm sorry, why the playground first? Because
yeah,
why are we doing the playground first?
well, yeah, because I thought that when you started this, the focus was supposed to be on the pond, so it just.
Oh, so I'm not sure if you're aware, there was a state grant that was awarded to the city a couple of years ago on a separate initiative of a group of folks in town that were wanting to have Newburyport's first all-inclusive playground constructed. So a grant was applied for, we received the funding. So that project is somewhat separate, but linked because there's a section of the playground that is within the 100-foot buffer zone here. So that one won't really impact the other in terms of timing. It just so happens that we're well underway for the playground work to happen. So meaning that they want to start that. In terms of timing, we're hoping the playground will be installed August, September, and that this other work will happen sort of later in the fall through the end of the season.
And what about whatever life there might be inside the pond? What happens to that?
Mike or Krista, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we're looking into that as well. We're hoping with respect to, aquatic terrestrial creatures through the drawdown that they'll be able to migrate out over the time. We understand that 5 days is a sufficient amount of time for them to kind of temporarily migrate to a new home. With respect to things like goldfish that may be in the pond, non-native invasive species, the concern we understand from Fish and Wildlife is that they may not want us to move them anywhere else because they may be diseased, and that's one of those big things for Massachusetts, is not to transplant fish from one way to another. I think, to be candid, we're trying to figure out what the correct process is for that. But at this time, it's if there's non-native invasive species such as goldfish, they'll be left, and terrestrial, semi-aquatic terrestrial animals will be left on their own to migrate out of the pond, given access to do so.
Yeah, because I think there's toads, maybe frogs. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a whole bunch of questions. I have spent a couple days reviewing everything in detail. I'm an engineer by background, and even some ecological restoration project experience. So if you'd bear, I have a whole bunch of questions, but let's
do it.
Start. For one, I've seen some places in the report, it talks about subsurface or surface aeration. But it doesn't show up on the final plans. Is that are subsurface or surficial aerators or constructed floating wetlands? Are those part of the project or not?
So
Or are they to be determined?
Well, we have a pretty clear idea of what we wanted, a clearer idea of what we want to do now. So as part of our report with the basis of design, we did consider surface aerators, additional surface aerators besides the existing fountain itself. So where we're at right now is that we're not providing additional surface aerators, not just from a cost perspective, but we're also very concerned about with input from the Parks Department, the aesthetic look of them, so that we don't want to have those additional bubblers or aerators that you might see on different ponds. That the intent is to provide a very elegant surface. So really the only disturbance or the surface disturbance that you would see based on the aesthetic quality of the pond at this point would be the fountain itself. There will be subsurface aeration. It won't, and so what we've done is that we intend to provide a form of either direct air entrainment into the pump supply itself, so that we can add air and oxygen into the pond from below, and then have that diffuse from the bottom surface through those perforated pipe up, and or ozone, so that we can also provide ozone, have an ozone generator to add ozone, which is O3. It will break down into gaseous O2 and then diffuse into the pond itself. So we're proposing subsurface aeration, but in combination with the return pipes that are being provided, that were shown in those red, the red dash lines that were shown in the pond plan, correct?
So subsurface aeration, was that costed out? Anyway, I know it's a little bit early in the process, but
I think
I
it's
didn't
also
see anything.
Yeah, it's also we're very cognizant of the maintenance as well. So what we did consider as well is that we did at one point consider weighted aeration tubes or weighted ozone tubes. The problem that we see though too is that if there were a problem with them, they'd be really difficult to access and to replace. So at this point, what we're trying to provide is a means of providing air through the pump discharge itself, so that the water that comes out of the pump station delivers air to the pond from below, and then that can get diffused from below. So we've moved away, not just from a cost perspective, but also from a maintenance perspective, to provide a separate aeration system that's mechanical, so to speak, within the pond itself. And that the intent is to provide air and water through that pump discharge pipe itself.
Okay, and how about the constructed floating wetlands? Is that part of the project or not?
Yeah, it was at one point. So when we actually, as part of our we had a sub consultant that we had on our team in a previous phase of the project that examined that. And at that point, from an aesthetic perspective, that was undesired, that it took away from the formality of the pond and the overall vision of the pond. It was an idea that, was strongly considered, but ultimately, from an aesthetic perspective, that we opted against the floating wetlands in favor of the perimeter plantings that we're providing.
Okay. You've done, this was a little bit surprising to me, but I didn't see any kind of real phosphorus in the water column analysis. How much is coming from the surface? How much is coming nowadays? And how much is coming from sediment? I hear a lot of words that it's coming, there's sediment release, but frankly, there was one single day of water quality measurements, I believe, with this entire project, and that was November 30th, 2021. And actually, all the parameters then, of course, look good, but what I think we need some kind of calculation. A lot of the problem that is postulated here is phosphorus from the sediments. I think that's a huge amount of this. But where are the loading calculations? How much is coming right now from, I don't know if the city and parks fertilizes or not. I don't know how much is from dog dew or from geese, but there seems to be there's no science. It's just we know, it's eutrophic and is cyanobacteria and things like that, but calculations anywhere?
So with respect to the surface water question, it's a very good one. I appreciate it. The smoking gun, based on the testing we've done, seems to be the phosphorus nutrient loading coming from the sediment itself, which is those concentrations were sufficient enough in the shallow sediments downwards of upwards of 5 or 6 feet, and then continued all the way down to the base. So, and to your point, Commissioner Mullen, when we did our testing, it was late in the year, so that's not a great time to test phosphorus loading in surface waters.
Recognized. Right.
So we didn't revisit it once we saw the phosphorus concentrations of what they were, and also knowing the long-term history of cyanobacteria, the pond turning green. I think we have a picture of that actually from Google Earth, and knowing that in that summer high temperature sort of scenarios, that system really ramps up, as I'm sure you're familiar with, which then feeds the cyanobacteria, which increases the water quality, and then which tapers back in the fall or winter. So once we saw that our ongoing nutrient loading problem wasn't necessarily the surface water, although the quality is impacted, we realized fairly quickly that sediment water interface is what really needed to be cut off to prevent future problems.
Not sure if I agree with that anyway. I mean, it can get bound up. And what is the ongoing loads as well? There's no guess, no any kind of stab at what the loading could be from the surrounding lawn and geese, dogs, as I say. So
yeah,
it sounds like
I guess could you so the loading question, if you could explain more about how you'd like us to take a look at that for you, because I think that's something we'd want to make sure we have the right answer for you.
Sure. Well, I know I've worked once before with Enser, engineering firm, and they did some analyses. They did some actual lab testing to see how bound up the sediment was, the phosphorus to the sediment, and how much was released to the water column. I know there's different forms of phosphorus as well, but right now, I mean, we're hearing that the phosphorus is coming from the sediments, but there isn't not even a single calculation, but associated with this. I'm thinking that the loading could be something else. I mean, 12 foot of sediment. This has been going on for a long time. I don't know if that was from the cows, walking around in this thing historically and all that. But anyway, I'd like to see some kind of.
Sure. So with respect to the question, like loading from geese and waterfowl certainly are contributing to that, especially in the summer months or the transitory months. We understood based on our conversations with the park department that all fertilizing in the park was cut off. I couldn't point to a date. So that source I understand has been eliminated, although going back, however, let's call it 50, 100 years that has been consistent to keep the park as green, but I understand it's not going. When we evaluated the liner system, even dredging, removal of sediment, trying to pull out the top things, the one path we did go down was the chemical treatment avenue. We did do some calculations based on the transfer of phosphorus from the sediment to surface water based on the concentration. Those aren't necessarily in here. We can certainly, I'd have to go dust them off, but the concentrations were such, working with like our lake managers and with other contractors that do alum treatment, phospholock treatment. They're like, yep, that the sediment's likely causing or consider it significant driver to ongoing nutrient loading in surface water during the summer months. So that was, again, the phosphorus concentrations and that transfer or that change in phosphorus over time, especially with changes in falls in temperature and heat and all that sort of fun stuff. That, again, it all pointed back to the sediment itself as the main driver. Which is also kind of coupled with the reason of wanting to get the water out of there, because while it's certainly suspended phosphorus, nutrients, E. coli, other sort of things that were identified, we want to get that out of there and start fresh again.
Yep, okay. Well, personally, I'd like to just see more in the way of water quality loading, but let me move on to something else. Groundwater. We know nothing of its quality. I know you have about what it is temperature wise, just based on, that's what it is in bedrock. We have no idea. Well, let's see, it's high in carbon dioxide, I do believe, and I think that feeds weeds and stuff like that. It's undoubtedly low in oxygen, and it's probably high in arsenic as well around here. So we have an extremely huge unknown of what we're gonna be bringing in for that clean water, if you ask me. Good, yeah.
Yeah, no, and those are very astute comments, and those are concerns that we're mitigating through the design process as well. Is that, and you're 100% right, that arsenic in the Merrimack Valley, especially with bedrock wells, is probably the #1 thing that, especially on the drinking water supply, that you have to be cognizant of for sure. So not only that, there could be issues with iron, there could be issues with manganese. Those are also considerations too. That's also something where, even from an aesthetic perspective, you don't want to introduce iron into this, so that when it precipitates out, it's soluble in deep in the bedrock, but then when you bring it to the surface and agitate it and then bring it to air, that soluble iron then flakes out and precipitates out and becomes a different form of iron, where we get that red staining. So those are all things that are in consideration. Part of the design process and part of what we're proposing is we are proposing, at least at this point, some form of bedrock well filtration, so that the intent is to not dump this water directly into the well. What we're also proposing is that once the bedrock well is drilled, we need to test it for at least 48 hours to 72 hours for constant pumping, to make sure that this is a reliable water supply in a drought in the summer. So we're going to do a long-term pump test where that water will be pumped, and we'll see if that water can sustain consistent pumping, so that if we do fall into a drought condition, that we have a water supply going forward that we can rely on. We also will propose, and we're also specifying, a water quality sampling test, so that once water comes out of that bedrock well, we're going to grab a sample of it, have it analyzed, and say, okay, this is what is coming out of the well at that point. And then at that point, we can then pivot to, we know we need and what we're proposing, at least at this point, is a bedrock filtration system. Once we get the bedrock water quality samples back, then we can pivot to say, it's going to be this type of filtration system. So we're aware that bedrock water quality is variable. It's something that we need to do as part of the investigation. It's going to be part of the early part of the construction process. I would say personally that, and that's probably going to be the first thing that we do is drill the well. And so that we know what we're dealing with from a water quantity and a water quality perspective. So then we can pivot to a series of alternatives that we're going to put in the construction documents.
Okay, yeah, I would think that would be way up front. Yep.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, well, that's probably it for right now.
I have a question about the benthic sediment 3-inch layer. How is that chosen? Was that to do with the turtles and critters and so forth, or and what kind of material is it, and how are you going to get it in there?
Commissioner Vine, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. Thank you. That is to be determined, the actual make of that material. We're working with our ecologists and our restoration ecologists to figure out what the right blend should be for a New England pond. But it's going to be, but to your point, the goal is to make a substrate that's suitable for habitat for reptiles and turtles and as necessary for what's going to live in there. So to kind of find something that's pretty close to New England pond bottom as best as we can. And that would be deployed probably by loading system, like probably even a Bobcat.
Okay, the 3-inch is, it's not a lot of tolerance there as far as 3 inches. I don't know what your plus or minus is, but that's you're gonna have to hit it right on there.
Yeah, we will do our best, and 3 inches is the goal. Hopefully it's a little bit more, but the quality is the question that we need to do is question we need to answer is how do we best create this protection of the liner material for ecological receptors, but also maintain a water depth. So we have a bunch of things we're working against, so we don't actually have to start dredging and removing material, which is a separate and costly item. So
no material is going to be removed, as I understand it.
That's correct. That's correct.
Are you going to be doing any grading within the pond itself of existing sediment there?
Yes, we will regrade as high spots or low spots to try to even it out to make, as best we can, and we create a workable surface to put the liner system down on. Correct.
And the equipment for that, I mean, this isn't an easy site to work on.
Yes,
what kind of material, what kind of equipment are you thinking about?
So it's a very good question. We understand previous to this that the pond has been drained at least twice that we know of. Once for the pond for the fountain replacement in the 1980s, and then once earlier. And I apologize because I don't have the data at the tip of my fingers. And reworked. So, again, we have low pressure ground equipment. We have several contractors we work with that have worked under these conditions, and it may be as simple as just working on low pressure mat systems that they use in other wetland restoration projects. So there is a means and methods component there that we'll leave to the contractor to address for us.
Okay, going to the dock, the freeboard on that dock I'm just trying to get a sense of a 10-foot by 35-foot dock. I'm a little concerned about what potential danger can come from that, from people using it. I'm not sure the freeboard, I don't know how practical it is to put a canoe in off of that, and all of a sudden the city is going to be responsible for whatever's going on out there. I mean, is there a program that's associated with it as far as when it can be done and so forth? Because things like railings and things like that are normally seen in a situation like this, though it's a canoe kind of thing. I don't know how much thought's been put in that, and probably be good to get a better understanding of just how effective that's going to be.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and I think that that's something that we'll work with Kim and the Parks Department in terms of their program. I think that right now, the intent of the dock is, it is to be, and again, I'll let Kim answer as far as, or if she has an answer at this point. But the intent from our perspective is for the dock is really just to provide a buffer, at least at this point, to serve a dual purpose, to provide at least a means and a method of providing access if that's the way the city wants to go. But it also provides a means of protecting our intake pipe so that we don't have incidental contact with that it provides basically a shroud or a sheath for that intake pipe that we're proposing through the bank itself. So as far as the programmatic value of that dock in terms of access, supervision, that type of thing, yeah, that's something that we still would have to work out with the Parks Department.
Yeah, it's actually the Parks Commission. But
Commission,
yes,
sorry.
so the commission many years ago had put together a program for this. There's certainly models across the state for that. The intent is that it would be a flat bottom skiff. At one point, Lowell's Boat Shop was interested in donating some or having some donors bring some flat bottom skiffs into the pond. And it's something that the commission is interested in doing in the future.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to make sure that what you're building is proper for that, what you intend to use it for, and that's safe.
Understood.
Did I understand right that you said that the runoff from the banks will not be going into the pond, or did I misunderstand that?
No, that's the intent. The intent is to try to make this a closed system, that the pond body, the water body itself becomes a closed system, so that the intent is to grade it and do the micro grading that's needed as part of the stone pathway that we're proposing, so that water doesn't go directly into the pond itself and serve as another potential source of runoff contamination, for lack of a better term.
So is it going to get filtered through the sand or the granular material around it? I mean, how are you going to discharge it if it's either going to go down or I don't quite get a good feel of what the intent is here.
Yeah, so again, I think that those are details that we're still working on as far as what the cross section of that path looks like. So again, the intent would be here, and it would be that anything that flows off of the bank would flow at either some point to the edge of the path itself, and then go downwards in a micro swale or something that can collect water from the bank itself. But the intent would be to grade it, or grade basically what we're looking at here is anything going right of this page here. So it would be, so what we still are working on at this point would be working on what this, so if we have the bank here, what you're saying is basically we need to work out what this looks like over here. But my intent, or our intent for this, is to make the pond as much of a closed system as possible from any runoff. So if that means we have to infiltrate at the base of the crushed stone path itself, then that would probably be the best bet for that, so that we don't have that runoff from the slopes themselves going into the pond directly.
So you're just assuming it's going to go downward and then into your layers here and not go into the pond, because you're not going to pump it away. It's not going to drain away. It's
Correct.
kind of in the hole.
Right, and that the intent would be that any water that comes from the slope itself would find a way and a path of infiltration at the interface between the slope itself and then the surrounding grading, and any surrounding areas with the crushed stone path itself. So
yeah, and I guess details on that would be helpful so we can understand that better.
okay.
And just the last thing I wanted to ask, others have questions, I'm sure. How is this going to impact the public as far as during construction? Where's the construction fence going to be? People still going to be able to use that sidewalk? Are we you know, are we going to be near Yankee homecoming time and things are going to be closed down? Because that is a pretty well-used area there throughout the year.
Yeah, so to speak to that a little bit, I think our intent was our construction fence would be outside of our erosion, of our outside erosion control. So that dashed line, we'd be leaving as many walkways as we could open while limiting access into the pond.
Okay, but so they'd still be able to use the sidewalk and so forth, but you wouldn't make it all the way across. You'd have to cross the street during all this construction if you were walking down that way.
I think that's one of those things we need to work with the contractor on. We're showing maximum approval for maximum staging access. The best staging that we could find is probably right there next to Eppa Way, where we're outside of the buffer zone. Certainly that is a flexible situation that if we needed to maintain pedestrian access to certain areas at certain times, please let us know where we should be doing that.
The other thing to note here too is that the start to end construction of this is fairly fast. So while we understand it will be, you know, inconvenient to not be able to use the park for a short period of time, I think we're only looking at what, 3 months, 2 to 3 months tops here.
Yeah,
Right.
I think even if we could say 3 to 4, I think that's kind of the window we're looking at.
Right. And it certainly would not, it would be well after Yankee homecoming, but that will not be impacted during that time.
Okay.
I have another question. Just how simple or complex is this going to be? And is this anticipated to be for the operator of this whole thing?
So the intent, at least from a water quality and a mechanical standpoint, is we're very cognizant of the city's and the Parks Commission's desire to have a low maintenance system as possible. So a lot of the components that we had suggested earlier on, we've actually eliminated in terms of simplifying the system. As we've discussed, we wanted to take out any additional surface aerators, any weighted tubing from that perspective, in order to keep it as simple as possible. The system that we would propose would be, there would be a control panel that would be inside the pump system itself that would automatically monitor things like flow rates, pressures, functionality of filters, and you would get basically a dashboard that the result would be a dashboard that the city and the operator would have to say, these are the system components that are working. These are the things that need maintenance and either need repair or need to be serviced. So from that perspective, the intent is to make everything as automated as possible so that it's not as much of a hands-on system as some other more manual type pump systems or other types of manual systems. So the filter systems that we propose, those would be automatic. The refilling of the pond from the bedrock well, that would be all done by liquid level sensing inside the pond, inside the wet well for the pond itself, so that as water evaporated from the pond itself, that once it got to a certain level, the bedrock well would kick back on to fill it back up and to maintain a water level within the pond. The intent would also be to backflush the filter, so that automatically happens every time the filter gets to a point where it's there's a pressure differential across the filter that would automatically backflush to the dry well. So the intent is to make everything as automated as possible. The contractor would own the entire system for the first year after construction. So part of our construction documents would include a 1-year guarantee. So after approved substantial completion, then there's a 1-year guarantee period where the contractor owns everything. And in that time, the contractor owes to the end user, the operator, whoever will operate the system, the training that's necessary. And that could be, and we can work that into how many hours of training that may be. But the intent is to provide a plug and play system where the pump station is assembled at a factory offsite. It's delivered to the site. It's rolled onto the concrete pad, then it's onto the concrete pad next to the wet well. And then the house or the shed itself is built around the system itself. And And then everything from there becomes automated, and that there's a dashboard that gives feedback on water quality, water quantity, flow, pressure, filter statuses, et cetera. So a lot of the stuff would be automated. And the intent also is, because it's not a swimming pool, or we're not dealing with caustic chemicals, that there's no need to handle any of those types of caustic materials or caustic chemicals that would require additional maintenance or require specialized training for that. So a lot of this is intended to be just pump, filter, add what we need to from an aeration standpoint, and then return back to the pond.
Just one thing to add there too, there is a precedent in the Parks Division here. They deal with a similar system at the in-street fountain. So there are staff in the city that are well-versed in these sort of automated systems that do chime from time to time, and they have to attend to them. And then also there is a backwash system at the Lily Pond at Atkinson Common as well. So there are 2 water bodies in the city already that our staff are well versed in maintaining.
Just one more quick thing, and that's it. I saw some words in the whole thing that said the pumps would run continually. Is that the plan or not?
So at one point early on in the process, we proposed to have the bedrock well continually fill the pond 24/7, with the intent of, and at one point we had examined looking at, because this was a fire suppression water supply a long time ago, 100 years ago or so, that we at one point examined looking at using the bedrock well to continually fill the pond and have that water continuously overflow, so that it would act almost like a skimmer to skim the surface off the top and have that water overflow to that to the old fire cistern network that exists within High Street and throughout Newburyport. So we decided against that once we determined that the groundwater, the localized groundwater table was 30 feet below. So what that ended up doing was that opened up the possibility of infiltrating this water or allowing for infiltration overflow. So from that perspective, we've scaled back on what the bedrock well will pump out. So it's only going to be used to top off the water supply to keep it full and not have it run continuously. The pump system itself, in terms of recirculation, that would run 24/7. And we believe that that's necessary in order to maintain and consistently maintain a high water quality within the pond itself. So from March or April to October, et cetera, basically the usable months from that perspective, that system would be on 24/7, 6 to 7 months a year.
Okay. Anybody else in the commission? Okay.
I have one more question.
Okay, David. Go ahead, David.
I wasn't going to ask, but Kim, does this mean that the canoe tipping contest can come back, or is it?
You'd be surprised at how many people have asked for that.
I was thinking that most everybody would have.
Yeah, lots of requests.
And what's the answer? Are you going to allow it? I mean, is the
it's not up to me.
you're
It's up to the parks.
creating-
It's up to the Parks Commission, honestly.
Well, what about the conditions that you're creating? Would something of that sort be? I mean, what happens when someone falls out of a canoe into this environment here? Is it an issue?
Mike, do you want to take that?
You
Yeah,
guys
I mean,
know.
the intent is if someone fell out of a boat, that they would be able to step on a firm surface, basically, that it would be benthic sand, and supported by stone. So, and the intent is that this water body is only 3.5 to 4 feet deep at the most. That we're going to maintain a 3.5 foot to 4 foot water supply. So, in theory, a full-grown adult could stand up in the pond if they fell out, basically. So, that, from that perspective, that if someone did fall out, that they would experience what you would find in a normal pond. It wouldn't be like, stepping out of into a swimming pool. Again, that's not the intent, but the intent would be that there's a firm bottom, it's armored with stone, and it's covered with benthic sand, so that if someone did, let's say, if there was water activity, that the intent would be that if you fell out, that it's pond water, good pond water, but you'd be able to step out and then and be able to stand up on a firm ground. Basically, that would be how it's built, how it's intended to be built right now, with a very firm footing.
Okay.
All right. Now, do we have any more in commission?
Joe, if none of the other commissioners has any questions, I could run through the list of questions that I've heard come up tonight, just so we have a good handle on what we are to get more information about.
Sure. Okay, can I have the public, Anita Greenwood has had her hand up for quite a
sure.
while. To
Yeah.
give her a chance to speak if she'd like to still.
Okay, Anita has.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't have my picture there. I'm Nita Greenwood, and I actually live at 151 High Street, so and a butter to this. I'm very excited to see this project. I wanted to ask about the pump house. So when that's constructed, how far back from the water's edge does it go? And does it mean the removal of any trees?
No, it's just on the other side of the walkway, and there's not any removal of trees.
Terrific. What about the design of the pump house? Kim, will the Parks Commission be involved in the design of that?
Yep. Chuck is already working on the design of that.
Perfect. The next question is about the noise of the pumps. What do you anticipate for the noise of the pumps in the pump house, or beyond the pump house, I should say?
Sure. So that there would be, you would have to be really, I would say, right up against or even inside the pump house itself to hear anything. So we can design, or we can specify what this pump house looks like to be insulated, sound insulated, thermally insulated, etc. You might hear a low hum if you're right next to the pump house itself from the outside. You might, but there are ways that we can mitigate that, and certainly we would not specify, or we would certainly not sign off on anything from a noise perspective that we wouldn't allow, or we wouldn't approve any built construction that had any undue noise or vibration or chattering from any types of pumps at all. So so from that perspective, once everything's built, that there should be no noise or a very low hum in very close proximity to the pumps once everything's built.
Great. And the construction pathway, so for the vehicles coming down to the pond during construction, when it's all done, what gets restored there? Is it a new pathway with still the granite steps, or something else is envisioned for that area?
Nope, the access from Auburn Street, the steps will be removed, and there'll be a flexi pave walkway that will bring you down to the pond, and the same at the other end.
Okay, and last question, how will children be able to access that basketball court? They'll have to come in round the High Street side to get into the basketball court?
It'll be the same as it is today, that the basketball court's not being touched as part of this project.
Oh, but where the construction vehicles come in, you know where those 3 stones are, where the kids normally come in, so that won't be affected? They'll be able to go in through those 3 stones?
I think the construction access is right where the flexi paved walkway is being shown right now. It's just south of the basketball court.
Okay, great, super. Thanks so much, everybody.
Okay, thank you. All right, Julie, go ahead.
Okay, this isn't gonna be very organized, but I'm just gonna try to run through questions that I heard. I have a couple questions to throw in along the way, just so we can get a good picture of the information that has been requested. So first thing I have is related to the wildlife migration during dewatering. is there a plan for that? Where are they gonna go? I know you said that you're sort of developing a plan for that, or you think that they might be able to migrate, but I think we need a plan that looks at that and says like where you think they're gonna migrate, where will they go? And if they're not going anywhere, you know, we don't want them getting hit by cars and things like that, turtles and whatnot. So would there be a backup plan for where you would take them? And then, you know, something like that. We've seen that at Flowering Pond down at Maudsley. So something like that would be helpful. Construction-based wildlife management. A question about the dock and public safety. Will there be railings? Will it come out in the winter? Will it stay in permanently? Questions about the dock. Subsurface aeration. You said that you're considering adding some sort of O2 or ozone generation into the system within the return pipes. But my question is that included in this design already, or is that something that you're thinking about putting into the design that's not already there? So we might need a little bit more information on that subsurface aeration component. Then let's see, analysis of phosphorus in the water column. We heard questions about whether or not we need more analysis of where the phosphorus loading is coming from in the water column. Quality of the groundwater. Could it be low in oxygen, high in arsenic, unknown manganese? I think you are planning on testing that once the well is established. But you did indicate that there may be some form of bedrock well filtration necessary depending on what does come out of the well. And my question is, that's great, but like what could a bedrock well filtration system cost? And is that potential cost built into this design already?
So yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, the answer is yes, it's factored into the design already. And I think that it would be prudent at this point, because we're dealing with a fixed budget, that it's included now. Frankly, I think it would be prudent to have it no matter what. So even if it came back with crystal clear water, which I doubt that it will, I'm sure there'll be some constituent in there that will require us to filter it to a certain point so that we can discharge it into the pond directly. But it is factored into the design and into the cost estimate at this point. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, that's great. So then next question I had was regarding the benthic layer, details of that 3-inch benthic layer, what that consists of and how much habitat that really provides. I know you're going to have a vegetated buffer around the edge. But one of my questions was that the NOI made the case for there being a lack of habitat in the pond currently partially due to the flat, consistent bottom across the pond. But it sounds like that's what's also proposed in the finished condition, is just a flat 3-inch base across the whole pond. So there's no features, habitat features within the pond, like rocks or elevated areas or dipped areas or things like that. So I just had a question about really what's the habitat you're creating? Is it just within that vegetated buffer, or do you feel like there will be some sort of additional habitat happening? Then drainage from the slopes, and you said that you intend for it to be a closed system, so you don't want any stormwater coming off of the slopes to add more phosphorus and contaminants, etc. So just getting the details on how that will be infiltrated prior to reaching the pond, how that will be designed. The operation and maintenance dashboard, it sounds like it'll be a pretty automated system. And the contractor will provide training, etc., for 1 year, but after that, I guess I think it would be important to know and to identify like who at either DPS or the Parks Commission which person is responsible moving forward, because staffing changes all the time, as we know. And we just need to make sure that there's some designated position, let's call it, not even an individual, but a designated position responsible for the management of this particular system. And maybe that's the same person who does Atkinson Common and the fountain and all that, but like, let's just put that in writing. Then the house shed details, sounds like you're working on that with Parks Commission. I was just wondering, does that have to go through zoning or planning for any kind of review, design review? I'm not really sure. I can ask in the office, but you might already have talked with them.
I think it's below the size, but I can check with Jennifer.
Yeah, I think Jennifer or Andy, maybe. And then that's it. Oh, I had just a question at the very end. The FlexiPave pathways that are going to replace some of the stairs. I'm just not familiar with that. And maybe I just didn't go deep enough into the NOI. It's probably, the details are probably in there. Can you just explain to me like how this FlexiPave?
Yeah, it was just installed along Pond Street last year. It's that material, it's that rubberized surface. It's totally pervious. So if you walk from the CVS along Pond Street, it's that new walkway.
Got it. Okay, perfect. That's what I need to know. Okay. That's it. That's all that I heard that I wrote down. Did anybody else have anything?
Sure, I got just another, well, here's a tip on the bedrock groundwater wells. Can we get any water quality information from all the other bedrock wells in the area? I know you guys identified where they were, but you know, to find out about carbon dioxide, oxygen, and temperature, especially, that might be just readily available. That's
Yeah,
just
no, it's a good, it's a good point. I mean, we can identify and research again where and see what information is available at those bedrock wells. Sometimes, and again, so that we can examine that a little bit more. I think that's fair to see what clues or indicators are there existing in the surrounding bedrock wells that do exist. So I think that's fair for us to at least have a preview, if we can gain a preview of what may come out of the well that we're proposing. I think that's fair.
Okay. And we didn't mention at this, how many pond turnovers are anticipated per year?
Yeah, so part of our means of scaling the system back is to, at one point we had a very high, we still intend to having a high flow turnover. But basically where we're at right now is we don't want a swimming pool. So we're not turning this pond over by any means, 4 times a day or anything like that. Based on the flow rates that we have right now, we're looking at about 1 turnover per week. So that would be the flow rate that we would be looking at. At some point we were looking at 2 times per week, but from that perspective, the pump equipment and the horsepower and the electrical load and the cost for that, we were cognizant of that. So where we're at right now is our target is to try to turn the whole pond over once a week.
Okay. And just something, just one thing I saw in the cost, I was sort of a little shocked at this. And I don't know if this has changed now, but the annual operating cost just for electricity provided in the report was $24K a year.
Yeah.
And sustainable wise for one, I don't know.
So part of that too is we've cut the flow in half. So we've cut the horsepower in half for the recirculating system. We have an estimate on what the horsepower for the bedrock well will be. But the intent, because we're not overflowing the pond, because we're cutting back on the turnover rate, that the intent is to try to scale back the electrical load. So we expect that number to come down quite a bit, and we're cognizant of that. So there are other opportunities too where we can take a look at. Those are not necessarily peak hours either. So overnight or certain times of the day, you wouldn't be paying the same amount for electricity as you would be during the middle of the day. So we're cognizant of electrical costs. We're cognizant of just power consumption in general. So that's something that as the design comes more into focus, we can provide better updated quantities on kilowatt hour and annual electrical costs for that. But there will be an annual cost for electricity, and that's just something that we're trying to capture, at least what we did try to capture early on in the process, and we're trying to whittle that down as much as that we can.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, we got anything else? I know we're gonna want to do a site visit at some point, but I think since at least a couple people from the commission are not here, maybe we can arrange that over email. But we should do a site visit and get an on-site idea of what's going on.
Okay, maybe Kim, maybe I can get some times from the commission that might work for the majority of them, and then I can run that by you all, and
Sure, that
we can
works.
come up with something, so we'll just coordinate about that.
Yep.
Do we have anything else? Anybody else
You want
got
me
it?
to release the screen so that you can have it back, Julia?
Sure,
I don't know if you have to go back to your agenda.
we actually don't have anything else on the agenda, but that's fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
you guys are all we have tonight on the agenda.
I'll just put the agenda back up. It's fun.
And let's say I'm glad for that.
Okay, yeah. Great presentation. Thank you.
Yep, that was good. So when would you like to have another meeting? You want to go to the next meeting? You want to move off to, assuming well, in either case, we can always continue to another meeting if you're not ready, but what would you prefer?
I'm going to look to the team, but do we think we would have some of these answers in 2 weeks, or do we want to say 4 weeks?
Would it be possible for us to have a debrief and get back to you guys on that, or do you need to know tonight if we're on the agenda?
Well, we can simply continue to the next meeting, and at the next meeting continue past if
Right.
if
You can
necessary.
always let us know, and we can just continue with without.
That would be my suggestion if the team's on board, to keep us on the agenda if that's amenable to everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so can I get a motion to continue this to the 16th?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
All right, David Vine,
Yes.
Carol Wagon,
Yes.
Dan Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Mullen,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, so we'll organize a site visit, and we'll see you guys then.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for speaking
you.
with us, folks.
Thank you.
All right, get a motion to close the public hearings.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
Roll call, David Vine,
yes.
Carol Wagon,
Yes.
Dan Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Mullen,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, do we have anything else we'd like to discuss beyond adjourning?
I don't have anything.
Julia, on the National Grid, they gave us a new plan. Was that, I'll tell you the truth, I didn't get a chance to really look at it. Was it the same as that they had before? They're only doing it up again?
Yeah.
or-
Yeah, it's the same plan. It's just that they had proposed that they would do the plantings this spring. So that we've just basically been waiting for them to start the plantings again. I haven't been out there in the last couple weeks. I don't know if they've done them yet.
They seem to put some straw down. I didn't see any real plantings.
They
though.
put straw down
Is this that bear area that Steve had been
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah. Yeah, last time I was there was a week or so ago and I didn't even see any straw, so I guess they're doing something.
I
Okay.
saw the straw.
Okay, I wonder if the
The
straw
reason I
was,
was asking is I just wanted to make sure Jordy was happy with this and if it's the same plan that he had already looked at it.
yeah, he had. I mean, neither of us are, no one's happy with it, just because we haven't seen any results yet. But if it accomplishes what they say in the plan it will accomplish, then we should be happy with it. But, you know,
Yeah, I meant him specifically because.
yeah, I'll check. I'll talk to Jordy. I'll just give him like an update on where we are with it and see if he has any additional comments for them.
Okay. Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
All right, roll call. David Vine,
Yes.
Carol Wagon,
Yes.
Dan Warshall,
Yes.
Bill Mullen,
yes.
and I vote yes. We'll see you at the site visit.
Or on Thursday night.
Oh, or on Thursday night. Yay, bye.
It's
Bye.
happening
Bye,
Thursday
everyone.
night.
Good night. The boards and commissions thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh,
Carol look how excited she is. She just
Gone.
booted out over
He's
that.
gone.
Okay,
all right.
All right.
Bye, all.
bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.